Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me tonight for our SAT/ACT diagnostic test results webinar. For those who don't know me, my name is Nick. I'm the founder and owner of First Choice Prep. Um, I'll give you guys a little bit of an explanation as to who we are and what we're going to be discussing tonight. But the first thing I wanted to mention is we will be getting to your questions. We're going to do a Q&A at the end of the discussion tonight. Anything that pops up, any sort of question that you might have in the moment, feel free to put it into the Q&A widget on the Zoom app there. And then I will get to it at the end. I will not be able to answer any questions during the presentation because I just am not capable of that. But yeah, I will absolutely get to it at the end of the presentation. So as I said, my name is Nick Wierda. I am the founder and owner of First Choice Prep. We are a full-service tutoring, test prep, and college advising company. We're located in northern New Jersey. We have two offices, one in Livingston and one in Millburn. I founded First Choice Prep all the way back in 2010. And since then, we've grown to a rather large team. And we've tutored thousands upon thousands of students. We've also worked with lots of people for test prep for the SAT and the ACT primarily, but also high school admissions tests and graduate school admissions tests. We work with many students for college advising and college essay coaching. And we've partnered with a lot of high schools to offer tutoring, test prep, and our SAT/ACT diagnostic test, which of course is why you are all here tonight. Because today we are going to be discussing that SAT/ACT diagnostic test and those reports. I'm first actually going to be discussing a little bit about the SAT and the ACT specifically, so that you guys understand what these two tests entail, how they're similar to one another, how they're different from one another. And then we'll be talking about our SAT/ACT diagnostic test after that. I'm also going to go through an SAT/ACT diagnostic sample score report with you guys, just so I can give you insights into how I look at these reports myself. And then after that, we're going to be talking about how you can take advantage of the information that you have in these reports to plan your child's test prep. And think about next steps, whether they're in freshman year, sophomore year, or junior year. And then we'll do the Q&A at the very end. All right, so the SAT and the ACT, let's get into that first. So I'm assuming everyone here knows what the SAT and the ACT are. But for those who don't, they are the standard admissions tests that colleges use, in their admissions processes, at least American colleges use in their admissions processes. They're, standardized tests that are meant to help them sort of compare students from a variety of different school districts and, different grading systems and all of that. I'm assuming everyone here knows that the SAT, like what the SAT is. That's a sort of very common test that we all took, or many of us took when we were applying to college ourselves. The ACT is another of these tests. It has certainly gained popularity over the past, 20, 25 years or so in this area. And now, I mean, for quite a while now, it is considered to be on equal footing with the SAT in terms of what it tells college admissions departments about the students that are applying to those colleges. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that there is no bias towards the SAT anymore, even if I'm sure that there was when the ACT first came onto the scene, but for quite some time now, there has been zero bias towards the SAT with respect to the ACT by any American colleges. These tests have a lot of similarities. One of them is like the number of times that they are offered each year. They're both offered throughout the year. The SAT is offered one more time each year than the ACT is. So you have 8 SAT offerings each year. You have 7 ACT offerings each year. They are both also used by scholarship granting organizations, both at and privately private scholarship granting organizations as well, in determining how much merit aid to give to applicants. And another important thing to note about the SAT and the ACT is that for college admissions, you really only want to be submitting scores from one of these two tests to colleges, not both. A lot of people mistakenly assume that a great SAT score and a great ACT score together will like help you in your college admissions more so than just a great SAT score or a great ACT score. That is just not true. And that's one of the big reasons that we, developed this test because if you are, trying to do like your best job of, like positioning yourself properly for the college admissions process, you want to just prepare for one of these two tests, get a great score on one of these two tests, and then be completely finished with the testing process. And again, since colleges equally weight both the SAT and the ACT, they consider those two tests to be on even playing field. You want to determine right out of the gate whether you're better suited to one or the other, and then just prepare for that particular test. So closer look at the SAT. So the scoring scale of the SAT is it's out of 1600. So it's on a 400 to 1600 scoring scale. For a vast majority of the SAT's history, it's been on that same scoring scale where it's split into two halves. And you get a score out of 800 on each of those two halves. The two halves, of course, being reading and writing, which we used to refer to as the verbal section of the test back when I was in high school, and then the math portion of the test. So you get a score out of 800 on each of those two halves of the test. The SAT now consists of 4 total sections. You have 2 verbal sections, 2 reading and writing sections on the test, and then 2 math sections on the test. And they are presented to students in that exact order. So it's reading and writing module 1, reading and writing module 2, then a short break, and then math module 1, math module 2. The digital SAT, which changed to a digital format last year, is a section adaptive test. So what that means is that students, well, I mean, technically what it means is that students' tests will change as they progress through the test. Now, the SAT is the lightest version of an adaptive test that exists. It is a section adaptive test, which means that there is only one adaptive component to the test at all, and that is which of 2 different possible sections a student gets for their second, their second section or their second module of each half of the test. So what I mean by that is that everyone who takes the SAT gets the same difficulty level section for their first reading and writing section. But then if they perform well enough on that first reading and writing section, and each test has a different sort of cutoff of what well enough means, but if a student does well enough on that first section, they then get routed to a harder second section. So their second reading and writing section will be a little bit harder than the first one was. On the other hand, if they do not make that cutoff and they don't quite do well enough on module 1 to get into that harder second module, they then get an easier second module. And that has a significant effect on student scores, which we will talk about in a minute. So yeah, and that like section adaptive component of the reading and writing portion of the test is also true of the math. So you get the first, your first math section is normal difficulty. Your second math section is either going to be harder or easier, depending on how well you did on that first math module. Another hallmark of the new digital SAT is that on the reading section of the test, the reading and writing section of the test, every question is a small, very short passage consisting of maybe 2, 3, 4 sentences max with one question attached to it. And then another hallmark of the test is on the math portion of the SAT. You are granted a built-in Desmos calculator, which is actually a very good calculator that makes a big difference for a lot of test takers. This is an illustration of the section adaptability of the SAT. So yeah, you get a standard difficulty first section. This is a good sort of illustration of what the difficulty distribution of a math section on the SAT would look like. The math sections of the SAT progress in order of difficulty. So your first section starts with easy questions, then progresses into medium level questions, and finishes off with some very difficult questions at the very end. And again, if you do well enough on module one, you are then routed to the harder second module, where you do get some easy questions at the beginning, but things start to get hard very quickly. And the last, I would say almost entire, like the last half of that section, maybe a little less than half of that section, consists of very hard questions. If you are routed to the easier second section because you didn't quite do well enough on the first section, most of your questions on your second section will be easy, followed by a few mediums and maybe one or two hard questions at the very end. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this does have a significant effect on students' scores. So if you make it into the harder second module, you are then able to get like the upper echelon scores for that particular section. We've illustrated that here. These are actual results from basically we went through the College Board's practice tests and tested out what the cutoffs would be, the numbers of questions on each of the modules you would have to get right in order to get into the harder second module. And these are some of our results. And as you can see, if like this was from one of their practice tests, of course, if you got 22 right on module one and you were then routed to the harder second module, got 22 right there, you're getting an 800 clearly. But what's more interesting to me is when you look at the sort of, the middle or the last three rows here, literally the last two rows. If you do just well enough on section one, and by the way, I should also mention that these cutoffs here, 16 right out of 22 gets you into the harder second module. 15 right out of 22 does not get you into the harder second module. These are just for this one practice test. These cutoffs vary from one test to the next. They're usually around somewhere between 12 correct on module one and like 16 correct on module one, at least for the math section of the test. But they will vary, so keep that in mind. But on this particular test, if you got 16 right on module one and, eked into the harder second module and then did very poorly on the harder second module, getting only 8 right out of 22, you still got a 600 on this particular practice test. If, however, you got 15 right on module one less than you needed to get into the harder second module, and you were then routed to the easier second module, and let's say you got all 22 of them correct. Again, these are actual results that we tested out ourselves. You would have gotten a 550 on this on the math section of this particular test. So it does have an outsized effect on your score. Students who are able to get into the harder second module will have better scores than students who are not able to get into the harder second module just because they got into the harder second module. Now, that said, you cannot get into the harder second module and get 0 right and still get a score of, let's say, 550. That will not happen. Your score drops precipitously as this number goes down into the lower single digits. But getting into it and then doing decently well on the harder second module will yield you a significantly better score than anything you'll be able to achieve if you only make it into the easier second module. So again, very significant impact on students' scores. Now, the ACT is not an adaptive test. The ACT is what's known as a linear test, which means that everyone who is taking the ACT on test day gets the exact same test. There are no changes to the test as you progress through it. There are a lot of similarities between the SAT and the ACT, though. They're both testing your grammar skills. They're both testing your math skills. They're both testing your reading skills. And to a degree, they're both testing your science skills. We'll talk about the science in a minute and how that's going to be changing for the ACT in the coming months. Of course, the scoring between ACT and SAT is significantly different. I'm sure you guys all saw that on your kids' diagnostic reports. The ACT is scored on a scale of 36. You get anything from 1 all the way to 36. They give you a composite score out of 36. That's like your sort of total score. And each of the individual sections are also scored on a 1 to 36 scale. So the way that they calculate your composite score is by averaging your English score, your math score, your reading score, and currently up until the coming year, they'll also average your science score into that. Of course, the ACT, as I'm sure many of you heard, is changing. And one of the biggest changes that they are making to the test is that they are making the science section optional. And they will no longer be including the science section in your composite score. And of course, we have made that change for our diagnostic test, as a vast majority of students taking that test now are taking the diagnostic now are going to be taking the new version of the ACT, which is being sort of rolled out now, piecemeal, and then completely and totally in the um, early in the next school year. Other big differences between the ACT and the SAT are that on the ACT, you have significantly more questions than you do on the SAT. This was very much the case even before the new changes were being rolled out to the ACT, but is still going to be the case even after the ACT makes these changes. So, quick word on changes to the ACT. They are trying to make their test shorter. The SAT, when it moved to digital so that they could make their test adaptive and therefore shorter. If they can make their test adaptive, that means that they can, glean the same amount of information about a particular student with much less material than they previously could. So they were able to shorten their test from a 3-hour paper pencil marathon to a 2-hour adaptive, computer-based test. When that happened, the ACT was still stuck with a 3+ hour test and sort of saw the writing on the wall and decided to make changes to their test as well. Again, in order to make it shorter. Now, they did not want to make their test adaptive because they thought that being able to continue to offer the ACT in a paper pencil format was like a competitive advantage for them. And of course, if you're offering your test in a paper pencil format, you cannot make it adaptive. So they kept it linear, they kept it non-adaptive, but they were able to shorten it relatively significantly. So like the ACT that is first being rolled out in a digital format for this spring for the April, June, and July testing formats, and will be rolled out to a paper pencil format as well in September, is now only going to have 131 questions if you don't take the science, because the science is an option, is going to be an optional section now, or 171 questions if you do take the science portion of the test, and it is going to be between 2 and 3 hours in total length. By the way, these changes are reflected in our SAT ACT diagnostic test. So the test is completely updated to the sort of new and enhanced, as they call it, version of the ACT. Even with those changes, though, you will still get less time per question on the ACT than you will on the SAT. The SAT gives you significantly more time to answer its questions, the ACT less so. But the counter to that is that the ACT's questions are significantly more straightforward than SAT questions are. SAT requires generally more thinking, more hard sort of puzzle solving, whereas ACT is much more, rewarding students for being able to work quickly and trust their instincts. It is by no means an easy test, but it is certainly less, I guess, tricky and mentally taxing, I'll say, than the SAT is. And another significant difference between the SAT and ACT is that on the reading section and the English section of the ACT, you're getting longer passages. So whereas the SAT reading questions were significantly shorter, 2, 3, 4 sentences long with one question, the ACT still has longer, like 2-column passages with 9 questions to them. So longer reading comp, but again, more straightforward. And then on the math section, the skills tested on ACT math are like significantly more broad than the skills tested on SAT math. SAT math likes to test a small subset of skills, but in a very in-depth and complicated way. Whereas the ACT likes to keep things a little bit more on the surface, but test lots and lots of different types of math skills. So let's talk about our SAT ACT diagnostic test. So our test, basically it consists of all of the sections of an SAT and all of the sections of an ACT interspersed amongst one another. So, for example, we start with an ACT English section, which of course we shorten. We shorten all of these sections to make the test like, more manageable. And we adjust the timing parameters for each of the sections accordingly. But we start with an ACT English section, then we go to an SAT reading and writing section, then an ACT math section, then an SAT reading and writing section, module 2, which is adaptive. We do incorporate the adaptive nature of the SAT into our diagnostic. And we work through both of those tests until we finished all 4 sections of ACT and all 4 sections of the SAT. The test is also curated to cover all of the most commonly tested skills and concepts on both the SAT and the ACT. So we've curated the test to make it as representative of the stuff that kids are seeing on pretty much every SAT and ACT as we could possibly as we could possibly do. And then our recommendation that you'll see on your child's diagnostic reports, our recommendation as to whether they're better suited to the SAT or the ACT is based on the College Board and ACT's official concordance table that they collaborated on. This is a picture of it here. They collaborated on this back in 2018, and colleges still to this day use it to compare SAT scores to ACT scores. So our recommendations to you were based off of this concordance chart. Okay, so now we're going to go and take a look at a diagnostic report. So if you'll bear with me. So this right here is a sample diagnostic report. It is a test that I sort of whipped up myself earlier today, as you can see. As you can see here, it'll tell you whether you're better suited to the SAT or the ACT. My sample report was better suited to the SAT than to the ACT. Now, just a little bit of insight there. If your score is 20 S8 within 20 SAT points of one another. So let's say, for example, you scored an 1100 on the SAT half of the test and a 21 on the ACT, which is equivalent to a 1080 SAT. That's within 20 points of each other. And that would be considered you're equally well suited to both of these two tests. If you're, if the difference between your SAT score and your ACT equivalent score is slightly greater than that, in this case, it would be 30 points greater, then we make the call for you. But of course, 30 points is a very close call. It's only 1 ACT point. So, if this is you and you did better at, let's say the SAT, but your child felt strongly that they were better suited to the ACT, then you should heed that. We put a lot of stock into how students feel about their, about these two tests. And if their scores are really close, but they, really prefer the style of one test over the other, then it might be a good idea to have them prep for the test that they feel a little better suited to. Now, there does come a point, 40, 50 point difference or greater, where it's not smart to do that because the amount of, the difference you have to make up with, the test that you're not quite as good at is so great that it's just sort of, it's not logistically prudent to do that. But in a case like this, I would say, you know what, let's see how the student feels about it. And also I, as the consultant, would be going through these reports to get a better understanding of exactly how they performed on each of these two tests and make a determination as to whether I agree with this particular recommendation. Most of the stuff that you can see here is pretty self-explanatory. As you can see here, the science score on the ACT portion of our diagnostic is not included in the composite. So you do get a science score, but it is not a part of this composite. The composite is only comprised of your average of your English, math, and reading scores. So again, this is going to be a change that the ACT is already going to be implementing with their digital version of their test starting this Saturday on the April 5th administration, and will be extended to the paper pencil version of the test in September. So, when that time comes, you will have the option to, if you're taking an ACT, you'll have the option to take it with the science or without the science. And if you take it with the science, you will get a science score, but it will be like this is reported separately. And then you can choose to report that to colleges if you would like to. Um, yeah, I mean, the ACT answer report, the SAT answer report is very self-explanatory. They tell you your answer, the correct answer, the question category. By the way, question categories are explained in greater detail further on down near the bottom of the report at the performance summary. If you just hover over each of these, they'll give you a nice little explanation as to what each of those categories means. Um, and then another little thing is when you see these green bars, the diagonal green bars, that means that the student omitted that question. So in a lot of cases, it means they weren't able to get to those questions at the very end because time ran out. Um, so yeah, that's that. And then of course you have your SAT answer report, which is exactly the same as the ACT answer report. Now, what I am looking at here in the SAT and ACT answer reports is usually like the distribution of wrong answers, like where students got things wrong. An example of that would be on the math portion of this particular report here. A little bit of a tidbit of information about the math portions of these tests. So the math sections of both the SAT and the ACT progress in order of difficulty. So the questions at the beginning of this ACT math section are supposed to be easy. And then they continually progress and get harder and harder as you go through. And, as you can see here, this sample student got more and more questions wrong as the test wore on. Again, likely because the questions were getting harder, but when I see something like this, where a student omits like the last handful of questions on the section, it also tells me that they were just struggling to finish the section in time. So like in this case, I can see that though the student did pretty well on the math section of the test, there's a lot to work on, especially when you get to the harder concepts tested on the ACT. And they're going to need to work on speed as well, because, having to omit 3 questions at the end is not really good, and also suggests that they were probably rushing through some of these questions, which they all got, completely wrong. And then just like time literally ran out before they could, click something for questions 28, 29, and 30. So something like this would suggest having, a student is having significant challenges finishing that section of the test. When I look over here at the reading, I see the same thing. And also I know that this section of the test, the ACT reading section of the test, is split up into 2 passages, each of which has 9 questions. So if you split that up here, you can see that this student did really well on passage 1, getting 7 right out of 9. Pretty good, nothing to complain about there. But then on passage 2, from questions 10 through 18, they did not do well at all, getting only 2 right on this passage. And again, having to omit the last 3 and getting 14 and 15 incorrect as well. Likely means that they took way too much time on passage 1 and had very little time to do passage 2, probably had to skim the passage. Anyway, time was a significant factor for them. So yeah, when I see stuff like that, and that is of course very common on the ACT because of the fact that it's challenging to finish that test in time, or the sections of that test in time. When I see this on a student's ACT report, it means to me that they're going to need to speed things up. That the pace of the ACT is not it's not up their alley yet. And if I was evaluating this particular report where the student is slightly better at the SAT, I would probably recommend that they just go ahead and prep for the SAT, because picking up the speed on the ACT is a very challenging thing to do without sacrificing accuracy. So if a student really struggles to finish the ACT sections in time, it's not a simple thing to just tell them to go faster or have them try to pick up the pace, because as soon as they try to do that, they are going to be getting way more questions wrong throughout the section, because they're going to be much less careful. They're not going to be able to, like, fully evaluate many of these questions or passages if you're doing reading comp. And it's a challenging thing to overcome. So yeah, in this case, I would very much agree with the assessment that the student is better suited to the SAT. So if we look over at the SAT results, um, so you can see that the student did much better on the reading and writing section than they did on the math section, at least score-wise. But it gets a little bit more nuanced than that when you look at the detailed reports. So, clearly on the SAT reading and writing, student did amazingly well on Module 1, getting only 2 wrong, which of course would warrant getting into the harder second module, which of course they did. By the way, so you guys know, our cutoffs for the harder and the easier second modules are 13 questions on the reading and writing portion and 11 on the math. So if they got 13 right or greater on the reading and writing, they get into the harder second module. And on math, if they get 11 right or greater, they're also into the harder second module. So of course, this student, harder second module, no doubt. They got 16 right out of 18. And then on the harder second module, things were harder, but they still did very well, getting a vast majority of the questions right on Module 2. And they were rewarded for that with a score of 630, which is an excellent starting score on any of these sections for someone just taking the diagnostic. You can see, too, that they sort of struggled a little bit on the vocab and context questions, which, of course, is testing vocabulary. And when you're on Module 2, the harder second module, those vocab words are generally harder. So it looks like this student probably needs some work on vocabulary. Only one other reading comp question wrong. So the sort of split between reading comp and grammar happens at the end of these analytical reasoning questions. So very, very good job on the reading comp questions here. And then when they get to the grammar half of that section, they did a little bit worse. They're going to need to work on probably a little bit of punctuation, some transitions, and some rhetorical analysis, which are like sort of two specialized question types on the reading and writing portion of the SAT that can relatively easily be taught, but this student definitely needs to be taught those particular things. Now, when you look at the math here, the story is significantly different. I mean, that's the thing, though. It doesn't look that different. Obviously, the student's score of 480 is much worse than their score on the reading and writing section of 630. But if you look at the actual, the correct answer report and distribution, it doesn't look like they did terribly on Module 1, and they did incredibly well on Module 2. The tail of the tape here is that they didn't quite, do well enough on Module 1 to get into the harder second module. So, here you can see that they got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wrong on Module 1, which means only 10 right on Module 1, which is just under our cutoff to get into the harder second module. And then they did really, really well on Module 2, getting only 3 wrong in total out of 16. So 13 right and 3 wrong is excellent. But because it was on the easier second module and the questions were easier, their score is depressed as a result. Now, when I look at this, though, and I see that they barely missed Module 2 by the harder Module 2 by 1 question, they missed the harder second module. If we can turn that around a little bit and teach them a little bit more, get them to be a little bit better at SAT math generally and get them into the harder second module, I could see them having, I mean, they're not going to have this easy of a time on Module 2, but they will be able to get significantly better scores just by virtue of being in the harder second module. So again, another reason that I would take a look at this diagnostic report and say to myself, this kid is definitely an SAT kid, because we can probably, without a ton of effort, get him consistently into harder Module 2. And then, of course, we have our work cut out for us there, but he'll already have, gained, let's say, 70, 80 points just by virtue of being able to get into that harder second module on SAT math. Okay, so then under that, you have your performance summary. And I feel like this is all pretty self-explanatory. These nice little circles tell you how well relatively the student did on those particular question types. We do split them up between ACT and SAT. There's a lot of overlap between the categories of questions, but the ways in which they are tested on the SAT and ACT are sufficiently different enough for us to keep these completely separate in the performance report. So, for example, the way in which rhetorical analysis is tested on the ACT is different from the way in which rhetorical analysis is tested on the SAT. Like just the style of the questions is different. So if I'm looking at a student's report and I see that they're an SAT kid and we're going to be working on the SAT, when I see that they need to work on rhetorical analysis, it means something entirely different to me than it would if we were working on rhetorical analysis on the ACT. If you look at the description, they're exactly the same because the descriptions are, from a higher level, the skills tested on rhetorical analysis are the same. But when you think about the nuances of the exact ways in which the ACT and the SAT test those particular skills, there is enough of a difference for me to just want to focus on, the performance report for that particular test. You can see that here, right? Like the student did not do well at all on the rhetorical analysis questions on the ACT, but did do very well on the rhetorical analysis questions on the SAT. That's because they're tested in a different way on these two tests. So yeah, it's fairly self-explanatory, the rest of the report. Again, it doesn't tell you the full story because the ways in which these skills are tested on these two tests are significantly different. But it does give at least a seasoned prep professional like myself a very good understanding of what exactly I would need to work on with a student to get them from where they're at now on this test to complete mastery on an SAT or an ACT. All right, so I think that about covers that. I am going to go back to the presentation, and we are going to start talking about what you can do with your reports now. So, students of all high school classes will take this diagnostic test. We have lots of kids in freshman year take it. The majority of the people who take it now, like in the spring, are generally sophomores, but we also have a lot of juniors taking it now as well. The plan of action, if you have a freshman who came in to take our test, thank you for coming in to take our test. I think that the test will give you a great understanding of where you will be when it does come time for you to start your test prep. But as a freshman, it is, just too early for you to start your test prep now. A vast majority of colleges really want to see test scores, SAT and ACT scores from a student's junior year or like very late in a student's sophomore year. Like we're talking June of sophomore year. So even if you did incredibly well on the diagnostic test, you still shouldn't be doing any sort of test prep at this point, or even scheduling a real SAT or real ACT at this point. Wait a little while, focus on your academics. From a college admission standpoint, your academics, both your GPA and your course rigor are the most important things. Make sure you're doing as well as you possibly can in school, challenge yourself academically. Let's say you're a freshman, you took this test and you didn't do so well. That's okay too. You're only a freshman. There's a lot that you still have to learn before you can, start to do really well on this test. And the best way to improve the skills that are tested on the SAT and the ACT for when it does come time for you to start your prep is to be a great student. SAT and ACT are testing the things you've learned in school, granted, in a different way than you've learned them in school, but you need to build a strong foundation, and that starts with school itself. So participate in class regularly. That'll help, for the concepts that they're teaching you to stick. Read as much as you can. So that is an underrated thing. I know that probably most parents here on this call are, always telling their kids to read more, read more, read more. Kids on this call, your parents are right. You should be reading as much as you possibly can, because reading is the skill that takes the longest to improve. It's the one that really does require organic, long-term work to get better at. You really can't tips and tricks your way to a great score on the reading portions of either the SAT or the ACT. You really do need to get better at reading. So, you have the gift of time. Start on that now. Make reading a part of your daily life. It doesn't even have to be super boring stuff either. You can be focusing on reading things that are interesting to you, but just start doing it now. It will pay off in the end, we promise. Get involved in extracurriculars. And that brings up another thing. Like, if you are a freshman in high school, now is kind of the time to start thinking about positioning yourself properly for the college admissions process. Of course, a lot of that has to do with the extracurriculars that you're going to be involved in throughout your high school career. And listen, if you are considering college advising, you thinking about sort of like exploring those options now would be a helpful thing to do as a freshman. But again, no test prep yet. You are too early for test prep. You can start that in about a year from now at the very earliest. And that brings me to sophomores, who, some of whom are in a position to start thinking about or even doing their test prep now. But again, because of the fact that your GPA and your class rigor are the two most important things in college admissions, bar none, even sophomores, you really just want to be focusing on your academics, being as good a student as you possibly can right now in school. You want to challenge yourself academically, take those, push yourself to take those harder classes next year if you're choosing classes now. Continue to read as much as you can. Since you're going to be taking your SATs or ACTs in junior year, you still do have time to organically improve your reading skills. So, start working on that now as well. And then, yeah, I mean, like, consider college advising options, consider sort of, you should be thinking much more now about like positioning yourself properly for the college admissions process in terms of your extracurriculars and your volunteer opportunities and the sort of the things you're doing outside of school to help, sort of bolster your college resume. And then, of course, as I mentioned, you might want to consider your tutoring and test prep options now. Now, for many students, that means just thinking about it, planning for it, not actually starting it. But for some sophomores, starting now is a sort of, a somewhat wise decision. Wouldn't be a bad idea to do it for some sophomores. So I guess we usually break it up into these two categories for sophomores. Students who are in geometry at the moment and students who are in algebra 2 at the moment. So, in our area, a vast majority of high schools and middle schools will have students take algebra 1 first. That's either in 8th or 9th grade. Then geometry next after algebra 1. That's either in 9th or 10th grade. And then algebra 2 after geometry, either in 10th or 11th grade. You need to have a very strong foundation in algebra 1, in geometry, and in algebra 2 before you can begin your test prep and expect to do well on the math portion of the test you're preparing for. Ton of algebra 2 on both of these tests, and of course, a ton of geometry and algebra 1 as well. So if you are in geometry now as a sophomore and you have not yet taken algebra 2, you need to wait before you can start your test prep. Of course, you should be focusing on your grades and doing as well as you can in school. If you're struggling with geometry class, like, consider getting some extra help, either going to your teacher or, talking to a tutor about it, because geometry is a significantly heavily tested, portion of both the SAT and ACT math sections. You can work on improving your understanding of grammatical rules. I know a lot of schools, especially in this area, don't really focus on teaching students grammar. So because you're not starting your test prep now, you can do some, academic work in, improving your grammar skills, either on your own or, through one of your teachers in school or through tutors. But that would be something that you sort of do now, since you're not going to be starting your test prep at this point. The other thing you could do, so like, because you are in geometry and not yet in algebra 2 and you're not math ready yet to begin your test prep, we wouldn't recommend starting your test prep until a little bit further on down the road once you've built a strong enough foundation in Algebra 2. Now, we hold a class over the summer that helps students become math ready to start their test prep. Like we give them a bit of a crash course in the Algebra 2 concepts that they will need for test prep. Um, for better or for worse, the SAT and the ACT don't test all of Algebra 2. They test certain particular skills in Algebra 2, and we help our students understand those skills so that they can begin their test prep a little bit earlier. So look into that. We'll be offering that in August. Yeah, I mean, for now, again, just try to be the best student you can possibly be, and maybe think about focusing on these, particular grammar skills and boning up on your Algebra 1 and geometry so that when it does come time for you to start your test prep, you're super, super solid on all of those things. For Algebra 2 students, you know, at this point in the year, you are ready to begin your test prep if you would like to. Now, I am not saying that this is the best time for a sophomore to be starting their test prep. Everyone is different, but I will say that you are academically ready to begin your test prep now if you are in Algebra 2. You've learned enough Algebra 2 to be math ready to begin your test prep. At the very least, you should start thinking about your test prep timeline. That is a very personal decision. And we'll talk about a couple of different sort of sample timelines in a minute. But you should be thinking about and planning for it now if you're in Algebra 2. And you can be starting a little bit earlier on your test prep if you choose to do so. Now, for juniors, it's spring of junior year, and if you haven't started thinking about the test prep process, or you haven't started any real test prep in earnest now, it's time to make a decision as to whether you're going to do that. And if you are going to do that, start with the test prep pretty much right away. Even to test optional schools, a great score on the SAT or ACT will help you to get in. The only places where it will not help you to get in is test blind schools, and there's very, very few of those. So if you think you can get a good score, if you did our diagnostic and you did pretty well on, you were kind of impressed by your score, I personally would recommend really diving into that and trying to do whatever you can to improve that score. You still have plenty of time to prep for the test and take it before your application deadlines. So you can get started on that now if you haven't. You should get started on that now if you haven't yet already done so. I would also, of course, college admissions wise, this summer is going to be the big time for you to work on your college essays, get your applications done. A lot of that means making sure you know exactly where you are interested in applying. So now is the time, of course, if you haven't already been doing this, to think about and finalize a college list, familiarize yourself with the types of applications you're going to be having to fill out and submit, and then start thinking about the college essay. You're going to have a few of those to write, and you definitely do not want to leave those to the last minute. Okay, so how to prepare for either the SAT or the ACT. So there's obviously as many answers to this question as there are students. But for most kids, let's say you're trying to improve your SAT score by 200 points, or you're trying to improve your ACT score by 6, 7 points. It's going to take probably 4 to 5 months to be able to of earnest prep to be able to do that. Maybe a little bit less if you're not trying to get as much of an improvement on your test. But you will need to devote a lot of energy to improving your score. Despite what you may have heard from, companies like Princeton Review, there are no easy tricks that will help you improve your score by 100 points. You do need to put effort and work into this to see a significant improvement in your scores. Now, you can do lots of different things to prepare for these tests. A lot of people choose to do self-prep. There's a ton of free resources available online. Books that companies like the Princeton Review offer at Barnes and Noble or through Amazon that you can use to prepare yourself for these tests. We would always recommend using official materials from the College Board or from the ACT, but you certainly can do that. The more work you do with it, the more you familiarize yourself with the style of questions and the kinds of things being tested on these tests, the better you will do. And a lot of kids who are, very self-motivated can adequately do that. So that is one option for sure. Of course, you could do tutoring. We offer lots of private tutoring ourselves. Feel free to reach out to us if you're interested in that. You could do group classes. We offer those as well. But again, the point is that you definitely want to be like setting aside time in your in your weekly schedule to be doing this for like and putting concerted effort into this for an extended period of time in order to get the most out of it. Um, so we have three well, I'm presenting to you three different sort of sample prep plans that many of our students will use. Now, as I said, these are not the only three possible things that you could do. These are just three general suggestions, but they are very commonly undertaken, especially by students who work with us. So the first of these for the class of 2027 would be the aggressive prep plan. So remember, class of 2028, this is too early for you, although this would be your aggressive prep plan for, next year. And the prep plan is you start generally around now, spring of your sophomore year. Again, you have to be math ready. You have to be in Algebra 2 now in order to be able to, even consider this. But yeah, you start now, you work through the spring and the summer, and you take a test early on in the fall. So you could take the August SAT, the September SAT or ACT, and the October SAT or ACT. Like, as I said, you generally want to set aside 4 to 5 months of time to really, prepare earnestly for this. So depending on what you're doing over the summer, that might cause you to need to push the test date back a little bit if you're going to be away for a long time during the summer. But yeah, I mean, this is a very viable test prep plan that many students, at least, students who work with us, they choose to do. The benefit, of course, is that are presumably done with your testing early on in your junior year before things start getting very stressful in junior year in sort of the second half when teachers are really piling on the work because they're trying to get through their curricula. You've got AP exams in the spring as well. This will allow you to avoid most, if not all, of those sort of stressors in the spring of your junior year. The next plan is the moderate prep plan, we call it. Again, it does require that you are in Algebra 2 now, or that you will have some, like an Algebra 2 foundation built before you start with with this sort of a prep plan. So what this is you wait until the end of the school year, you finish out the school year strong, and then you begin your test prep in the summer. And you prepare through the summer and some of the fall. You take your first test sort of in late fall, November SAT, late October ACT or December SAT or ACT is your first one. And then you do your second one at the very next possible administration, which would likely be like a February ACT or a March SAT. And again, that is if you have to take a second one. Most kids do have to take more than one SAT or ACT, but you could, of course, be completely finished by the end of the calendar year. And then lastly is our traditional prep plan. This is, of course, the prep plan that, like, me and my cohort used. I think sort of everyone used this prep plan back when I was in high school, and is still very valid now. And that is to start your test prep in the late fall or early winter, and then test for the very first time in the early spring. And then if you have to test again, you could test in the late spring and still be done with your testing process by the end of your junior year. If you're in geometry now and you will be taking Algebra 2 next year, you would want to start with this traditional prep plan. Now, of course, if you do some Algebra 2 tutoring to help build your foundation earlier than this, you might be able to start earlier than this and move your test prep timeline up a little bit. But if you choose not to do that, totally fine. You just probably need to wait until November, December or so to start with your test prep and expect to be able to do well on the math half of the test. All right. So that's the bulk of the presentation. Again, we're going to be talking about, we're going to be doing questions and answers and talking about next steps in a minute. But if you have to jump, thank you very much for coming. And please feel free to reach out to us with any questions, or if you'd like to discuss, tutoring, test prep, or college advising of any kind.